Hello, my name is John Joseph Hansen. I was born May the 24th, 1949 in Portland, Oregon, Multnomah County. I was the son of Edwin Peter Hansen and Betty Marie Joseph, and I was their first son and second child of their marriage. This video I'm making is about me and my life. I'm going to make several of these over time, and so we're not going to have everything on one shot, but that doesn't make any difference. It's over my life, and so I'm doing this hopefully for something that you as my ancestry will enjoy and or relatives of me will enjoy. So today's discussion I'm going to talk about is my wife Kathy and I, how we met and how we started our family. We have now been married for 43 years. I may not be able to get all 43 years in on this discussion this time, but that's all right. We're going to do what we can. I'm going to start this discussion by explaining a little bit about how we got introduced and how we started dating and married. In January of 1975, I was taking skiing lessons at Snowbird, Utah. It ended up being about like the first and only season I ever went skiing. But while I was riding one of the chairlifts, the gentleman I was riding up the chairlift with, we were talking, and we had been familiar with each other a little bit now for a couple of weeks as we went to these lessons. And as we went to these lessons, as we were riding up the chairlift, I was asking him about dating and expressed to him some of my. I was 26, they're 25 at the time, and was telling him how frustrating it was to try to meet young ladies who weren't just freshmen in college. And he invited me to attend what were known at that time as Young Special Interest Dances. And these are dances that were held not just once a month, but sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. They were intended for people who were single and never married, 26 and over, or for those who had been married, were now divorced and or widows or widowers, and were intended to provide a social climate for these groups to meet. This was a program that was in the church at that time. It has evolved into several other things by now, but anyway, he invited me to start going to these dances. I was only 25 at the time, but within a few months was going to be 26. So I figured, well, they're not going to check IDs anyway, so I decided to go to the dance. As I went to the dance the very first time, an acquaintance of mine from a previous housing development in Provo, a student housing group called Autumn Manor, an associate of mine or a friend of mine I saw there at the dance. So I went over to him. His name was Joel Croft. And I went over to Joel and said hello. And at the time he was dating this young lady that he introduced to me, and her name was Kathy Miller Zufeld. And so Joel invited me to have a dance with Kathy. So Kathy and I went out and had a dance together, and Um, at the time we were dancing, or while we were dancing, she commented about how my hair was pretty long and that I was kind of casually dressed. And so we got to know each other a little bit better as we danced along. And I asked her, I said, well, who do you think you are, my mom? And she laughed. But anyway, the dance ended, and she went back to Joel and sat by him. And I danced with other girls during the evening as well. Anyway, later I had occasionally later at night, I guess it was the next week, I saw her at a dinner or a social that was being held before the dance. And this social was just to have refreshments together and then to go to the dance afterwards. I found out Kathy's birthday was going to be in another week or so, and so I invited her out for dinner on her birthday. By the time we met that second time, she'd already broken up dating with Joel. And so I didn't waste any time and began to date Kathy. Our first date, we went to Salt Lake City and went to a restaurant there in Salt Lake in an old church building called the Restaurant de la Fontana. It's kind of a Mediterranean style restaurant, and had a fountain up by the front. And again, this was Kathy's birthday, and so I went ahead and I bought a birthday cake for her and had it in the trunk of my car. When we got up inside the restaurant, I told her, I said, oh, I forgot my wallet out in the car. I'd be right back. So she was sitting in the restaurant waiting while I went out to get my wallet. Well, I went out and got the cake out of the back end of the car, and I took it into the kitchen. Went in the back door of the kitchen and found a server there and told him what I wanted to have done with the cake to bring it out for dessert for her birthday. Oh, and they were just excited to do it and help any way they could. So I went back in and around from the back and in the front door where she saw me go out, and I came in the front door now again, and I had my wallet, and okay, let's order up and have dinner. And the Fontana the De La Fontana restaurant would serve meals by courses, and it was typically a 4 or 5 course meal. Keep talking. So they'd start off with one course, then move to the next, and then the next. As we got through with our last course, they brought out the birthday cake, all ablaze with all the candles and sparkler on the top. And so at that point we went ahead and excuse me here for a second. At that point, everybody sang happy birthday to her. And as they sang happy birthday, then she blew out the candles. And then they served up the cake for us. So that was a real surprise to Kathy. You have to remember now, this was our very first date that we had. I was pretty impressive, wouldn't you say? And so anyway, after dinner, we had intended to take in a movie at a theater in downtown Salt Lake. The name of the movie was Earthquake. Earthquake, of course, was a Charlton Heston movie about an earthquake that hit San Francisco. And so anyway, there was a lot of gripping and suspenseful kind of scenes, and so Kathy would hold on to my hand real tight as they were going through these things and this event. And one other interesting thing I ought to add at this point now too is that my roommate at college at the time was Lee Swenson. Lee had started dating a young lady in Salt Lake by the name of Valerie. And so Lee had a date with Valerie set up for that same night in Salt Lake. And so he rode up to Salt Lake with Kathy and I, Lee did, in the back seat, and visited with he visited with each of us, getting to know Kathy as we drove up. On the way home that night, it was a snowy night and kind of bad around the point of the mountain, and so there was a car that had gone off the side of the road, and a man out by the front of the highway and trying to get someone's attention to help stop and give him a ride. So I pulled over and he got in the back seat with Lee in the back seat of the car, and Kathy and I were up front, and we drove him to American Fork, where he went into his house, and we went on our way home. But anyway, I thought that was just an interesting kind of a sidelight. One of the things Kathy told me on our date when we were waiting in line at the theater to get in, I had my arm around her and she says, "Now John, don't you kiss me." And I didn't know that she would just be so uncontrollable, so I didn't do it. Anyway, that was our first date that we had that night. Now at this same time, I was going to be graduating that year from Utah Technical College in Provo in electrical and automation. So I was filling out in January, I started filling out applications and sending in my resumes to different places for work. I had one where I did it to Yellowknife, Northwest Territory, Canada, to be an underground electrician in a gold mine. Oh, that sounds rather adventurous. Northwest Territory, that sounded like a rather intriguing place to go. So I sent out an application there in response to their ad. And I told Kathy about this and other places. In fact, while we were starting to date, I had a couple of different job trips that I went on. One was down to Dallas. Now, let's get back. It was interesting that, I'm just starting this first date with Kathy. We had no commitments or anything by any means to each other yet. And so the very next night was a fireside at a young special interest fireside, Sunday night at a church. And I had already had set up a date with some other young lady there to go to that fireside with her. And Kathy saw us there and really got her upset at me because of that. But I said, well, we had no, we've had one date so far, that's all, And so, anyway, that was only the one time I went out with that one young lady, and we kept going together, Kathy and I did. In April of that year, I asked Kathy to marry me, and we did it at night when we were having the NBA playoffs were going on, and back in '75, these were happening in the month of April, unlike today where they go on until about June, I think. But anyway, the playoffs were going on, and I had invited Kathy to come over to my house, and we were going to watch the NBA playoffs and have popcorn. Little did she know that I had already made out several plans about, I'd already ordered up a ring for her and was already in possession of it, and had a plan that I'll explain in a minute as to how to get it to her. As you know, we all wanted to get engaged in peculiar ways. In other words, different ways to surprise people. No, it wasn't just a matter of going to dinner and getting down on your knee and proposing. It was a matter of trying to come up with a clever idea about how to do this. So, she was over at our house watching the NBA playoffs with me. Well, I was watching the game. She was looking at a catalog. And this was a catalog, and there used to be some stores out that these catalogs would have a lot of rings in them at first, and jewelry sections, before they'd get back to the other things. So she was looking in the jewelry sections of this catalog. And so she'd say, oh, I like that one, I like this one, I like that one. And she'd try to show them to me, and I'd kind of look disinterested, you know, or not too committal about it, you know. And so anyway, halftime came. We went upstairs. And my mom and dad lived upstairs in the house. I lived in the basement. And so she sat down with my mom in the living room and was talking with Mom about, family and kids and so forth, you know. Because Kathy had 2 kids, Nathan and Priscilla. And so my mom was always interested in knowing about those 2 kids and how they were doing and everything. And so anyway, I was in the kitchen popping popcorn. Popcorn's had a big deal in our family ever since this. But I was popping popcorn. And after I got done popping the popcorn, I got it all buttered up and everything and salted, and it was in a big kettle pot. And so I had taken her engagement ring. I had taken that ring and I wrapped it very carefully into some cellophane, and I put some Scotch tape around it to hold it together so that it wouldn't get greasy, oil, buttery popcorn all over it. Anyway, I popped that in the bowl, and I got the bowl of popcorn out, and my mom knew all about this. She was just in there, just practically having to contain herself, you know. She was so excited to see what was going to happen. So anyway, we went back downstairs into the basement and watched the rest of the basketball game. So I put the popcorn bowl between us, and Kathy on the right side of me, and popcorn bowl in between us, and so you know how it gets to be when you're eating popcorn. You just kind of reach into that bowl into the same spot all the time and pop the popcorn in your mouth, and you don't even look, you know. You just little by little you just eat, and hand reaches down to the same spot. You kind of just keep going. Well, she hadn't come across that ring yet. And so I kind of take a nonchalant glance over into that bowl to see where she was reaching all the time. And as she was reaching, I got a view of where that ring was at. And so I had to flip it over to where she was reaching all the time. So I just nonchalantly reach in to get some popcorn myself. And when I would do that, I'd flip it over to where she was reaching. And sure enough, in about 2 or 3 more hands of popcorn, she picked up that ring. And she pops it right in her mouth. She hadn't felt the cellophane, so she just popped it right in her mouth. And all of a sudden she stops and she pulls it out of her mouth, and I said, "Do you like that one?" And she just, "What?" And she looked at that ring, and I said, Kathy, will you marry me? And she said, yes, 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 yes. I said, well, that's good. Let's get married then. And so she said, I got to call my mom and dad. Well, she calls down to her dad and her mom. She called home and to share all this exciting news. Little did she know that I had already called them, and I asked her dad for permission to marry Kathy and to ask her to marry me. And he had said yes. And then secondly, I invited them to come up to Provo to have an engagement dinner with us at the Hotel Utah at the Sky Room for that Saturday night. And so that was our official announcement. It was at the Sky Room. Well, they accepted that invitation. Kathy didn't know anything about this now. So she wants to call home and tell her family that she's engaged. And so as she's on the phone to her sister Becky, Becky says, oh, well, they've gone to the Dairy Queen, or the post office, which was always their secret code for Dairy Queen. And so anyway, oh, I just got to talk to Mom and Dad. And Becky said, well, what happened, Kathy? What's going on? Oh, I can't tell you. I had to talk to Mom and Dad. Have them call me when they get in. Well, they never called her back. So anyway, I took Kathy on home that evening, and the next morning early, knocking at her door was her mom and dad. They drove overnight from Mesa up to Provo to be there for this engagement dinner that night. And so they were there, and she just burst into excitement to tell them all about this engagement, that they were looking forward to meeting me. And so she called me to let me know that they were there. So that was how Mom and I got engaged to each other. That was in April. And then we got married July the 10th in the Provo Temple, and had a reception there at Stan and Sharon's yard in Orem, Utah at the time, and they hosted that. So we had a great wedding and reception, and then we went to the Homestead Restaurant, or resort, I should say, up in Midway, Utah for our honeymoon. And then we went up to Flaming Gorge Forest area, and we camped up there for 2 or 3 days. Because I was living in we were now going to be moving up to Wyoming, up to Green River, Wyoming, which is where I'd already started working an underground mine at FMC Corporation. And I was an underground electrician for them. So that was how Mom and I met, and how we got engaged, and how we started our family. And now 43 plus years later, we're still together, and we've got a wonderful family, and we're going to talk more about that at another time.